start now.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Environment Committee of April. We've got some members of the public in attendance. We've got some members of the public in attendance. I believe Mr. Finn. What do I recognise you? Would you like to address the committee before we start?
So basically, the situation is, and I believe Robin has circulated this to yourself, concerned about the pollution levels, noise on the A421, 422, especially on the part between the Audi and Gorkut roundabouts by the Everton Road. So Lorraine started this off a little while ago, and she did write to DEFRA and Environmental Health, and we got some replies back from them, which we feel, did forward them to Robin, which we felt was, well, poor, inadequate to be the most. So when we talked about measurements of pollution, you know, on lovely backs from 2016 to 2020, which obviously 2020 quite looks good because of the lockdown we had, so all the figures dropped. But the areas they were concerned about, which I've got in front of me, is we've got West Street, Bridge Street, Lower Street, so on and so forth. So they're all located around the town centre. Now, obviously, we've both lived on Merton Road since 2001. When we first moved there, you know, there was traffic, we was aware of that, but the traffic has become more and more louder, more of it. And the road that is obviously along there has become more and more internal, worse, aware, whatever. And then we get temporary repairs that are done, and they're not fit for purpose, to be fair. I mean, they've just done something on the roundabout by the only roundabout in the last couple of weeks, but it's awful. I just don't get why we're paying for it. Someone's paying for all of this, and it's substandard, and so then it gets repaired again. I mean, especially as you go out towards Badgers, you've got the road there is all breaking up again, etc. But that's not really my beef while I'm here. My beef is about the pollution and the fact that when the rain wrote to these people, we got some replies back, which have you circulated those, Robin?
The members have had them. I gave them to the town clerk.
So we thought the replies were very, well, I don't know what they were treating us for, but that we then looked at the some of those replies and we then did our own sort of research. It seems that the last time the 421, 413, 422 was actually measured for any pollution was back in 2019. And it was also referred to that we looked at the valve, which we did, and bearing in mind that we've got the new development coming in behind Gorkut Fields, of, I believe 460 houses. There was a mention of that within that report, saying that the road did not need any measurements because of the amount of road usage there would be from that development. And I think they've been very meagre on the amount of road movements there would be on that, and say 460 plus houses. I believe it's somewhere around about 970 too, which I think, and I think under the VAT rules it didn't need I think it didn't need any measurements of pollution, etc. But as residents, and we're only starting this off, you know, with us to the moment, we will go further with it. And we feel that there should be some measurements along that road because the pollution levels, I mean, to me they seem high. I know that the reply said that because we've got the vegetation there, the vegetation could cope with the pollution. Sorry, don't accept it. I can say that my windows, if I have them cleaned today, yeah, I know we can talk about the Sahara dust, etc., but there is always black covering of dust on those windows, and I'll be there within the next couple of days. So that's where we are, I think, with where we are at the moment. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I've written to Greg Smith, no reply.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, so yeah, Ryan did write to Greg Smith, and I know we met him at the meeting that was down here last month, wasn't it? And he promised dearly to reply to Lorraine. She's had the holding letter, but
Yeah.
that's it. So you just feel a bit disjointed about it. Well, I think our main thing is this road as it is, and the amount of traffic on it. I know we can talk about east-west, HS2, but the road is, you know, and the lorries that are coming there, because they're empty at night time, you just hear, if they hit anywhere,
Rattling.
yeah.
And they hit the potholes.
They hit the potholes, and then you've got the squealing of the brakes as they pull up. So, and I know that obviously the is it the expressway, was it Robin that I was talking about?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, I understand that's now been on hold or done away with. So what does that mean for that stretch of road, for our road in between, well, we'll also say from Tin bypass to the Bletchley, Buckingham, Bletchley, Aylesbury roads and Milton Keynes roads for Buckingham. So that's where we are with it, at the moment, and I feel that it should be being looked at. And the fact that throwaway comments that we got back from Aylesbury Bar, etc., we just feel that should be taken for fobbed off. Yeah. So, you know, from a council standpoint, I'd like you guys to perhaps look at it in another different manner. I don't know whether that's a possibility at this stage. So that's all I've got to say.
Okay, well, thank you very much for drawing that to the committee's attention. I should just caveat that we are the Environment Committee, so all the planning issues would be discussed under the Planning Committee. But we may have seen on the agenda that following the conversation we had at the annual town meeting, I did actually put the motion forward. The mayor also passed comment on this as well. So I was keen that it got on the agenda. So we will be discussing that very topic of pollution. And if the committee is minded, we might swap around items 4 and 5 if you wish to stay for that. Right, thank you very much. Right, if there are no other members of the public that crept in while you were speaking, so I think we'll progress with the first item of the agenda, which is apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Councillor Onward, who's fasting, Councillor Gaty, Councillor Bourton are away, Councillor Wood has just completed a long work shift, so can't be here, and Councillor Don Green has just messaged 10 o'clock to say she can't.
She's not well. We happy to accept those?
I would agree.
Yeah, thank you. Any declarations of interest to declare tonight? No. Okay. Item 3 minutes of the meeting of the 28th of February.
We agree.
Everyone's happy with them? Excellent.
Yeah,
agreed. Thank you. I'd like to propose that moving item 5 up to item 4. If we could
Second that.
Yeah.
Second.
Okay. So item 5 is a motion proposed by Councillor White to ask Buckinghamshire Council what measures it has in place to measure air pollution particulates in and around Buckingham, including the town centre and the A421, and what steps it is taking to deal with any unsafe levels of pollution. This, as I said earlier, this is related to a conversation at the annual town meeting from local residents, and the mayor also raised this issue following the meeting at the annual town meeting as well. And I know that Councillor Stutchfield had a recent correspondence from Buckinghamshire Council, but I think from a town council perspective, the motion as it's worded probably still stands, but I'd be happy to have a discussion about that.
Second the motion.
I've got a hand up before you, I'm afraid.
That's fine, that's perfect.
Councillor Harvey first and then Councillor
Yeah, I was going to second the motion. I got that first, Robert.
Well, that's perfectly right, John. It's a good gate to go through.
Okay, so the motion is seconded, so we can discuss the motion. Are there any comments or questions or items people want to discuss? So, well, as do you want to reserve your right to respond at the end?
Yeah, all right. Okay.
So, Councillor.
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you for the members of the public coming today and following up from the annual town meeting, which shows that meeting was what it was meant there for, which is to consult the public about their concerns. I hope that we can take some of the, without going into detail, Chairman, some of the points which are raised in it about the timings and the town centre and whatever. I think we could read them as noted with your agreement, that those form part of any response we make with additional questions of variance on it. Though I am concerned, Chairman, that we have got a situation where, for various reasons, the road hasn't been clearly assessed for pollution, along with other areas. I do remember the last time we had the pollution assessment in Buckingham. I think it was set outside Lloyd's Bank, which of course is gone now, or going, and next to W.H. Smith's in the town centre. There was a big air thing there. I think Marshall Nichols parked his truck next door to it. That probably helped the out the recordings of the pollution for the town centre, but it was an actual recording, so it wasn't a deviation. But I think we do need to ask them to express what their ambitions are from a town council's point of view with the 421. Ask them, will they be assessing the pollution before, so we know what the zero level is now, because before the development is built, it's a good time to know what the level is then, so that when we can measure it after the development is built, see if it's actually increased, because otherwise we're nowhere. But I think lots of the information in there is quite long to go into, but it just going into all it was quite a detailed response. I'm still going to go back to them on that in a separate issue, but I don't think that's for Buckingham Town Council once I've fully digested it. But are we happy to use this as a form to enrich the motion, not to contradict the motion? But I think the motion itself stands very well, asking a plain question, but we should observe the information within the motion to make sure that we actually don't get a response back saying we've already answered these questions, and that way we best represent the interests of the public. I think.
I'd be interested to hear what the committee view is. My view is that that's a conversation you've had as a Buckinghamshire councillor with Buckinghamshire Council. The town council has not raised this topic with Buckinghamshire Council yet. And I think if we keep it very succinct and very simple, they will have to review how they're going to respond to this in a different way to how they respond to you on that. So I'd be keen to keep it very simple and straightforward and expect there to be a bit of a table tennis ping pong on further responses. And I think it'd be important to understand fundamentally what is the Buckinghamshire Council's view on pollution and particulates in and around Buckingham, rather than go into too much detail at this point, because I'd like to see how they respond to that.
Thank you, Chairman.
That would be my view.
So we can compare comparisons. That's what you're saying, aren't you? We can compare their response with the response we've received or one's received.
But I'll be interested to see what else we've got around the table. Councillor Harvey, next.
I obviously support the motion. I've just been running through my head the road between Milton Keynes and Vista, the 41, and I think this is the only area in Buckingham where there's any housing close to that very busy trunk road. All the other areas are kind of like Tindrick is bypassed, Vista is bypassed, and most of the places housing is well away, but Embleton Way and the new estate, and of course the new estate on Tindrick Road, all the houses back on very closely to the road. So I think it's very, very likely that there's going to be spillover of the particulates that have been of great concern in terms of causing asthma and heart problems amongst young people, children, as well as older adults as well. So I think I'd be interested in the correspondence that will come out of this, that we ask the Shire, Council how they make a decision where to do the measuring. They've done it in the town at some point 2 years ago, but why in the town when there's not an awful lot of accommodation people living here? Obviously some people live in the centre town, but there's many more people living on the outskirts of town. So I just think we've got to start digging with this. And also I'm wondering whether it's worth doing any research into any comparable areas. Milton Keynes, of course, is built in a way that keeps the traffic away from the main through traffic away from housing again. But are there any places, say Bedford or Oxford or Banbury, where maybe some of these measures have been done on comparable roads? Can we find out about that? Are there any published research into what are, where it has been measured in other nearby counties? Is that available, in the public space? I think it's worth seeing. If there's a road that's similar to the 421, then we can reckon that if it's bad in Banbury, it will be bad here as well, because the traffic is relentless on the 421. That it doesn't stop really throughout the night.
Yeah, I think the road that springs to mind that'd be similar, I think, would be the A41 as it enters the south of Bicester, because that's a major trunk road, which is backed onto industrial and housing estates.
Well, the new estate will be on the south side of Bicester.
Well, newish, yeah.
Newish, well, yeah, it's still being built, but yeah. Again, the housing is quite a long way away from the actual bypass road, but I think it's worth looking at some research. Whether we've got capacity to do that research, I think it's worth.
Well, I'm conscious that Buckinghamshire Council is the relevant authority for both highways and for environment. I'd be keen that they respond rather than have to use officer time here that's already stretched. But perhaps depending on what the response is, then that could lead to something else, or somebody else are taking that on. Councillor Davies.
Thank you, Chair. While I understand what you're saying about getting a response and then working away from that base point, I've always found that the vaguer or more general the question you ask, the vaguer and more general the answer you get. So I would probably be thinking along the same lines as Councillor Stutchbury as to put some more into the motion in order to make sure that we get specific answers to the questions that we need answered, if that makes any sense. So
I suppose what I don't want to do is to have given the answer already. I want Buckinghamshire
it's the way you phrase the question.
To the fundamental issue of how do they want to deal with air pollution. And if they say we don't want, there's no need to, so how can you say there's no need to if you've not measured it? That's basically what I'm trying to get them to dig their own hole.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm just being too clever with the way I've worded it.
I think we need to be a bit more specific about the concerns and about what we are looking for them to do.
Have you got a frame of words of how you would want to amend the
not off the top of my head, I'm afraid.
That's the problem. We need something to agree.
If anybody else has any thoughts on it, or Stephen.
Okay, do you want to have a think about that? Councillor Anderson.
When speaking about comparable trunk roads, there is of course also the A41 going out of Aylesbury before it gets to the Aston Clinton bypass. And there's lots of building has gone on there, and there's older existing housing right along the roadside. And then also we're talking about pollution. But then we go on to talking about air particulates, whereas the members of the public have very clearly stated that noise pollution is a huge concern as well. So I think we need to be asking about that just as much as the air quality.
Yes. I
think John's.
I was just thinking, but while he's crafting, do you want to go first?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a note. Strictly speaking, what I'm thinking about is more for the planning committee, but perhaps it could be noted that this is something we haven't explicitly explored when we've been looking, particularly at multi-house applications. We've talked about all sorts of other things. And we should now include this as part of our questioning, both of ourselves and when we appear in front of committees, and to make sure that developments, when they're put before us, are looked at in terms of pollution on adjacent roads. Do you see where I'm coming from? Because at the moment we'll talk about having grey water and electrical points for electric cars and those things, and we've added those into our questions. And I think this is something we should standardise as a question now in the future, and when we're looking at developments, big and small, because I think it's a cumulative thing. You could have 20 houses built and okay, and then you find another 20 or another 100, and before you know where you are, there's a very large population quite close to the roads, and we need to be questioning that right the way through. And I say it is a question really for planning, but as we're discussing it this evening, I just thought it might be worth minting the note.
Yeah, I see where you're going with that, but I suspect the cumulative impact of new small development is insignificant compared to thousands of vehicles on an existing road.
Accepted.
And also the data is showing that the national fleet is getting better. Because obviously with Euro 4, Euro 5, Euro 6, but of course, if the volume of traffic increases, then whilst the vehicles themselves are getting better, you've still got more vehicles producing slightly less particulates of pollution, but obviously it still keeps growing at some level. I'm conscious not to try to muddy the waters about planning, but maybe that's something that
I appreciate it.
Could be raised as a separate topic for the planning committee if anyone on the planning committee wants to raise that. That seems like a perfectly sensible.
We can put that on the agenda for the next planning meeting.
But I'm probably being a bit I'm keen to keep this very focused on what we can get from Buckinghamshire Council to progress this issue.
Happy to support this, Chair, so no problem.
So we've also, I think the noise point is well made, and I'm still trying to figure out how we can be more specific without being too specific. So, Councillor Harvey, did you want to come back now?
Yeah, I'm doing my best with a few words here. It depends on how tight we would be on. How tight we would be on the wording of the motion, but I would propose that we amend it to read to ask the town clerk to correspond with Buckinghamshire Council about what measures it has in place to measure air pollution and particulates. Let's put in air, noise, and air and noise pollution and particulates in and around Buckingham, including 2081, and blah, especially in the likely dirty spots. So we zoom in a little bit more.
Yeah, the first bit is superfluous because everything from this council has to go through the town clerk.
Exactly.
So I don't think there's much point adding that. But the noise, I think I'll be happy to accept. I think that makes perfect sense. And a phrase of words of that last section.
Especially in the likely dirty spots. I didn't think hotspots worked when we're talking about noise and particulate pollution. I don't know, it's just an idea. But can I just, that's just my suggestion. Just an aside, back to the research idea. I'm assuming there must be research which says that in a certain road there will be a plume that will show how far it spreads from any particular road, all right, atmospheric conditions, wind, etc., allowing vegetation and so on. But there must be research there which says if you're like, you know, I don't know, 500 meters from a road, you're not going to get much. But if you're maybe like in Embleton Way, I don't know, 30 meters from the road, then you will get some. I mean, there must be research that pulls that out.
I would imagine so.
And it's worth looking into that, I think.
Okay, second and final time coming back before we wrap up. Councillor Secretary.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Listen to the thing. I think one of the things we do need to read in my correspondence is that, you know, there's no significant air quality on the area where the constituents who come tonight live. There's been no recorded level taken there. So I think we need to ask that question. We also have to note that they had recorded West Street, Bridge Street, Wells Street, Candleford Court, Oxham Market Square, 16 Market Square, and 16 High Street, which rather suggests that the east side of the town has been measured and the west side of the town has been ignored. So I think we do need to ask for comparable figures. They say that there's no logical, it's very difficult to measure every area. So I think we should be specific at 2 pinch points. One pinch point being the Tesco's roundabout, which is a well-known junction for all the traffic. And then I think because of the fact that the constituents are here today, I think we should include the area adjacent to the Aldi and the Embleton Way junction because of the braking on the traffic lights and when people stop and tick over. Some modern cars turn off, I notice now, but some older cars like my own, they don't turn off, they keep running. And of course, electric cars like your own, Chairman, don't need to turn off because they don't drop any particulates out. But I do think I'd add those 2 points to it because we need to be specific in that because then they can come back and say why they can't do an air pollution test there, because if they can do it in all them other areas in the town centre, I think it's quite feasible they can do it in those areas. And I don't think that's an unwieldy thing. I think as a slight amendment, I'd suggest we add that. I don't know if it's not contradicting the motion, it's actually supporting the motion.
I suppose the problem I've got with that is you're already presuming what from Buckinghamshire Council will do to the town council.
No, I'm not. I'm asking them, would
No,
they?
you already assume there isn't any measurement there. I think the town council needs to get its own response from Buckinghamshire Council to admit it hasn't got any data. We need that black and white. And I know you've got your own email,
based on
but Buckingham Town Council needs to have that.
I think you misunderstood me, Chairman.
Yeah, but if you're suggesting where they need to put them,
No, I'm
that's already assumed.
suggesting that would be asking them whether they would measure the pollution at the Tesco's roundabout and the Aldi junction / Embleton Way. I think that covers Mead Way. That also covers Badgers. It also covers Lace Hill, and that covers, as was said, about the large amount of accommodation that lives along the road, which I think Councillor Harvey said about. And I think we asked them, would they consider doing it? So we at least got the figure. That if they're not going to do it, then that's another figure.
I need you to draft an amendment then. Because
well, the amendment would be.
Well, do you want to have a think about that rather than speaking it from the hip? Have a think about what that amendment would be, and I'll let you come back a third time. Councillor Davies.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to propose an amendment to Councillor White's motion to change to ask Buckinghamshire Council to request that Buckinghamshire Council conduct a new survey into the levels of noise pollution, air pollution, noise and particulates, particularly on the A421, and also furnish Buckingham Town Council with the results of all previous surveys that they have on record.
That sounds very good. I'll second that.
I think that covers.
Can do, but unfortunately we've just lost the noise issue again.
Sorry?
We just lost the noise issue.
No, I said noise. I said noise.
Yeah, that's all.
yeah, noise and particulates.
Noise, yeah.
But not in terms.
Yeah.
It is making, sorry.
I was just going to say that it's one thing asking for raw data, but that's not going to help us because we won't know what that raw data means. I've been chastised before about bringing amendments on the day, and this is the problem when we're trying to do amendments on the day, is actually unintended consequences.
I mean, would it be possible to have that almost as a supplementary part of the motion? So use the motion as the initial correspondence, and then depending on the response back, then use that as the follow-up response.
Because that's quite likely some of the information they may or may not supply to us. But
well, if they say they haven't got that information, then that's taking it one step ahead already without having to have another level of correspondence with them, surely.
Yeah. I suppose I'm very conscious of residents who are at the meeting today about one particular location, but I think we need a Buckingham-wide response from Buckinghamshire Council on this topic, because it sounds like they are
Well, I'm not-
overly concentrated on the town centre and forgetting the bypass.
I
which
didn't
is,
say anything about concentrating.
No, from what Councillor Secretary was saying, but we don't, but a lot of information dotted around in different email chains rather than the town council having its own. Anyway, sorry, I should let the debate happen for the amendment, which was seconded by Robin. John, did you want to speak on the amendment?
Yeah, we're trying to write a letter in committee.
I know, this is what I was trying to avoid.
That's never a good idea. That's why I said that we asked the town clerk to correspond with Buckinghamshire Council about what minutes, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And we leave it open, and then Paul has heard the debate, and I can trust Paul that he will raise these issues in the letter. There won't be any exclusions or inclusions, it'll just be a pointed letter, and we leave it to the town clerk, because he's a good bloke.
But you're left with a problem, John. We've had an amendment which has been seconded.
No, I appreciate that,
Robin,
Robin.
can we not speak?
But we can agree that amendment.
Come on, we're on a committee, we don't need to do this.
We can agree that amendment or not, it doesn't make much difference, because I'm saying that the town clerk write a good letter and he'll do a good job.
Okay, that's,
We don't need to tie it down too much.
okay, anyone else wants to speak on the amendment? Okay, we're going to have to take a vote on the amendment then, so those in favour of, actually, are you happy with the notes you got on the amendment?
Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, probably
Yes.
best to, yes.
So councillor Davis has suggested we ask Buckinghamshire Council to request that they conduct a new survey into levels of noise and pollution, including particulates, particularly on the A41, and furnish the town council with the results of all previous surveys on record.
Okay, thank you very much. Those in favour of the amendment?
Sounds good. For.
Those against? Okay, so the amendment is carried, so we're back to the substantive motion. Do we need to debate this or can we just go to the vote?
Let's get to the
We're
vote.
all in favour.
I think we're all on the same side.
We're all.
Everyone, those for the substantive motion then?
That's unanimous.
We're all
So
on
it should have still had in it the steps taken
Yeah.
about unsafe levels of pollution. It was just that first sentence that was being changed.
In addition to the motion.
Can I just, I think the town clerk could be able to take this
Yeah.
motion until it's accepted.
Yeah,
Yes, sounds good.
But I think, John, just for future reference, I think the point we don't often agree, but I think you made the point that I tried to do something very simple and straightforward. We tried to write the letter in committee, which is not a great use of the town clerk who's employed to do that. But I think we got there in the end. Right, we're then reverting back to the order of the agenda, so back to item 4, the action report. Town clerk, is there anything you'd like to draw to our attention before we ask any questions?
Firstly, actually, under apologies, I should have given you apologies from, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I should have given,
Yeah, thanks for coming.
should have given you apologies from Lee, who unusually has permission to be away because he's in France for family reasons, and also Nina, who's not well. So if there are questions I can't ask, I'll send them afterwards.
Can we send our, Neela couldn't make yesterday and obviously we missed her and can we send our kind regards to her and hope she's better soon.
I've got a comment on the last two actions that members may want to raise things before I get there, if I jump to the last two.
Yes, yeah.
So 689, the climate action plan, as you're probably all aware, the last meeting we talked about wildflower seeds, and I said there wasn't any funding, but since then we found some funding and we gave away the wildflower seeds as part of the event yesterday, which went really well. And the second item, the conservation group, we had an email, I think yesterday, from the volunteer organisation with an offer of help and support. Now that's not come in time for discussion or debate, so we will process that in the office and hopefully send something round in the next few days. What the option might be. So it looks like there's a positive way forward there. But obviously we need to look at budgets and come back to you with that formally.
Thank you very much. Any questions on the action report? Councillor Suchbury?
Just comment, Chairman. You wisely, with Councillor Donald, proposed on 123/21. It might be the members reading the report tomorrow. I think it's Communities and Localism Committee, where they're looking at resilience, which takes in much of the future planning or the views of the council, how they're going to liaise on future flood risks. So that might be something that at some point when the council, Buckinghamshire Council, decides that we may want to bring back to the Environment Committee, so that we at least understand where they're going to work, and at least assured that the way they're going to work works with us. I will be attending that meeting tomorrow, but if somebody's off sick, so it's my job to attend.
Can I comment to that? Thank you. So just to say in response to Councillor Stuchbury's point, in terms of the Buckinghamshire Council's resilience team, that they're kind of emergency response team, and Buckinghamshire Council have a statutory responsibility to provide an emergency response to local authority situations that affect local authorities. So back in the day, Buckinghamshire County Council were responsible for the district council's responses, for example. They've obviously got all their work together. They're working on a county-wide basis now. We've done some really good work with that team on our community flood plan. So we've been the pilot pretty much in the work we've done in the community engagement. That's really good. And they've been really good. We've been really good. What we haven't yet worked out is what happened. And we had a vote, I think it was in resources a little while ago, where members were really clear that as a council, we do not provide 24/7 response. So we chose not to pay staff to be on a 24-hour response in case a full tree falls down, because we're just not the scale that's appropriate to do that given the risk level. But that does mean that Buckinghamshire Council technically are responsible for an emergency response that affects our land or property. But at the moment, we have no arrangement or agreement for what they would actually do, and they don't know how they would do it or if they'd be able to. So at some point, we need to have that conversation with them, but they're not yet at a place in their merging process. We really have that conversation as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, I'm attending the Buckinghamshire Strategic Flood Management Group meeting tomorrow. It's a sort of residual role I had when I used to be in the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee. So I may well raise it at an ALB if that would be helpful as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions on the actions?
Okay, two quick ones. 543, the Castle Hill Information Board. I saw this was obviously on the action plan, and I did inquire of Buckingham Society if they got any movement, and I haven't had a reply, but I will be poking them with a sharp stick to see if I can get a reply, so we can get something there. And the other one further down the page, 679, which is the community centre survey. I noticed there's no timescale or proposed on there. I wondered if that was an oversight or something that perhaps we should look at.
So let me draw your attention to a different oversight. In the confidential section, you'll see there is an item, agenda item 15, community centre structural survey to receive and discuss a report from the estates manager. I didn't realise when I sent the papers out I hadn't included that report. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to deal with that item this evening. The report is ready, so I will, with your permission, I'll send it to resources for them to deal with, because we need to get it done for the next meeting. But that will be to agree for the survey to go ahead. Once the survey is completed, it will then come to this committee to discuss the findings.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm thankful for that, because it's a very important thing.
Yeah, I thought we were going to have an item on the agenda about trees that we discussed at a previous meeting, about the year of the tree and that sort of talking about a love tree zone. That was, we agreed at a previous town council meeting, and I thought it was going to be put on the environment agenda. I thought.
I didn't have a role in the agenda this time around, but I don't recall that being mentioned for this.
I thought that was going on. I thought planning were taking that forward.
Yes.
I thought environment was, but okay, we'll put it on planning then.
It's done.
I mean, there's an issue in planning as well. It's a both and really. But okay, if we can put it on the next agenda, because I've just seen so much trees in the action report, we can put it on the next agenda, that's fine.
Just to help, John, it went on the planning agenda. The chairman of the planning, Mark Cole, put it on the agenda.
Yes.
It went through, and we came to a conclusion about it. What we haven't actually done is, I've seen no no publishing of that conclusion, which was, I don't want to do the discussion. I think that's for Councillor Mark Cole, but it was dealt with at planning because it was from planning that it originally came and ended up coming to the environment and went back to planning, and he wanted to move it forward on his agenda. So it has been covered, be assured. So in a strange way, if you read the minutes of the planning committee, which not the ones that Anthony's got, but the ones that previous ones that Mark did at council, you'll see that it will be in there.
Yeah, I mean, there needs to be a bit of a discussion, I think, between councillors to decide where they want to discuss trees. Because for me, planning should be about planning applications and planning policy, not about the environment in general.
Yeah.
And there does seem to be a bit of a muddying of waters of what goes on what agenda.
I'm just saying what.
So I think if there's a specific issue you want to raise, then I think just remind the relevant committee chairs and the town clerk, and then we can have maybe a discussion about how best to go about that.
I've been out with
But I am conscious that we've not had an update from the tree wardens for a while. That might be a useful mechanism for the environment committee to just have a general tree discussion every 6 months or so, which might be useful. And I know Mark did mention a tree that went down up in Page Hill recently.
Yeah.
I have no idea if that had a tree preservation order on it or not. But a tree of that size and nature, you think actually should it have been put forward for it? I don't know what the pros and cons were, but we would have that conversation, and before you know it becomes a planning issue, like an environment long-term issue. So I think it's plenty to be discussed on that in a properly formatted agenda item, I think. Right, anything else on the action list?
Only to say, Chairman, I asked for an item to be on the agenda to do with the area of trees in Cornwall Meadow car park. I wrote for between the last Environment Committee and this one, hasn't appeared. That might be because the information is difficult to find.
Go to me or to the town clerk?
I wrote to the town clerk because to know whether we could put it on the agenda, because there was an element of confidentiality in it, and it hasn't appeared. Can I be assured through the town clerk that that information will be shared with the chairman?
Can we stick to the action list? And if that's not an agenda item, you can talk to the clerk afterwards. It is useful if you want things on the agenda to talk to the chairman. It is quite helpful sometimes.
Yeah.
I think that's not a general comment for a few of you. If you're going to complain about what's on the agenda, don't then have a go at the chairman.
I'm not okay.
If you didn't ask them. Right. Anything else on the action list? Okay. Probably worthwhile with the next meeting being the first of the municipal year to have a sort of deep dive on the action list and just make sure things are progressing. And like you pointed out, if there's dates of the acts that are very perhaps raised up. So maybe allow a decent chunk of time on the agenda next time to go through in great detail.
It's very lengthy, the action list.
It is, which is worrying me a little bit. Things are being closed down or being progressed. So pretty useful. I think the committee maybe spent a bit of time just going through that. And if things can be, things have moved on or things have changed, then we close it out or we chase. Okay, if that's the action list, we can move on to budgets. A little bit too much red for my liking, but town clerk, is that too
This is, we're almost at the end of the year, so it's not quite the end of year budget because Jodie hasn't actually finalised everything through, but it gives you a pretty accurate flavour of the end of year committee. So there are some overspends. There are also lots of underspends which we don't report in the same way.
Which was where I was going to get to. That this doesn't read very well in a public document that we talk about all the spends, but we don't actually congratulate the team for an underspend.
Good point.
So actually, in the big picture, the committee is not overspending. So there are some things which we buy between codes and some we haven't. And some things, so £350 for flood damage, that's unavoidable. Yeah, but happy to take specific questions. Okay, well, you just answered mine that we don't report the underspends, which is a bit of a shame, maybe something to think about in terms of presentation to the public. Councillors who are concerned about what's in red ink on the papers. Councillor Sutchbury.
Well, I think, to be fair, to find the underspend, you've got to go through all the accounts to find the underspend. So can I suggest that for the minutes that we, with the agreement, that we just take those underspends within the budgets which are there and put them in the minutes rather than go line by line in a particular way this evening to actually pick them out, because there are, if you look through them, some things are 72% spent, some things aren't, some of those are underspent, some of those things because we haven't actually had an order come in. So it's quite difficult to do that, and we've decided to record overspend, which is a good thing. So I think perhaps we should make a habit of recording it, but just have a general note in the minutes about the fact that we are not overspending, and if we can put some good things where we have underspent, because we may need that money for something else later in the year.
Okay, Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, just the last item in the list of explanations, overspend due to wrong transcription.
That should say, yes, it should say transposition. Thank you for highlighting that, Councillor Harvey. So it's item 403-258-40.
To do with the cemetery lodge or something?
Yeah, so it's literally, so you'll note that the figure in the budget is £4,072. The actual figure for the year is £4,702, and that means that when the budget was inputted, so when I input the budget into the spreadsheet for the preset meeting in January 21, I typed in 4,072 in error instead of 4,702. And that mistake has then been copied by 2 other people, and it's been checked by 2 other people, and nobody spotted that until the end of the year.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you for that.
These things happen.
But you're able to report to the committee that despite those are overspends, the underspends are balanced out.
Absolutely. There are a couple of changes to make overall in the whole council budget, but certainly once that's completed, we'll be underspent.
Excellent. I'll give you a second opportunity.
Yeah, well, when we go to overspends on the garden arrest, we have to be mindful of the fact that the garden arrest only had to be, the extension to the garden arrest only had to take place because we waited 5 years for the planning to be able to get on with the new cemetery. We wouldn't have been spending that money on it. Even so, the overspend on the garden arrest, I'm sure, at least we'll be recruiting some of that money, sadly, as people come and need that facility in the forthcoming period. And so, though it may sound of overspend, it's actually something we've done because we needed to do it, because we're a bearing authority. So I think the public would have accepted that that amount of overspend was probably necessary, but probably not waiting 5 years for the planning.
Thanks for the history lesson.
Well, it's always good, isn't it?
Right, any other questions on the budget? Something else raised? So we've received the latest figures, and I'd like to congratulate the team for coming in on budget overall. If that is indeed the case. Thank you very much. Right, item 7 of the agenda, bridges in Bourton Park. A verbal report from the town clerk.
A brief verbal report from me. Work is ongoing on the bridges. It's taken much longer than was anticipated. That's partly because the contractor had other work which was delayed before they started this job, which meant they were delayed by some months before beginning. Obviously, winter complicates things. They are underway. There may be some moderate additional cost to report on the next meeting, but we're still waiting to find that, because until you actually get to the bridge and start to pull it apart into pieces, we don't actually know how bad the situation is. They have managed to reuse some bits of bridges they've moved around, but overall it's roughly on track with a possible moderate overspend, but we won't do that until we agree with the committee.
Okay, because obviously my concern was that we've got 2 bridges very close to each other, that it was too expensive. We need to have a fundamental discussion on how much do we spend on picking a duplicate bridge over investing that money in something else.
But I think you're referring to the issue of, we have got the bridge which isn't being fixed. So at some point,
so what's the third bridge then? Or are we still on the first bridge?
it's hard to have that conversation now, isn't it?
Well, I'm assuming we're not talking about the concrete one, because that's not in our ownership. We're talking about the 2 timber ones.
More than 2 timber ones.
At Bourton Park.
Yeah.
Which is
So which ones are
But
we
without getting a map up, I'm going to struggle with the conversation.
I thought I had automatically assumed we were talking about the 2 down at Bourton Park and the car park.
Bridge is further up as well from that in Bourton Park.
Isn't the car park one bridge number 1, and then the one just up a bit is bridge number 2 in the list of bridges, from my memory, on the map?
Well, I think we need to just count on what bridge we'd had the report on.
Or is that the one by the Otters they're working on, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we're talking about those ones down there.
At the moment, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like the way last discussed, so I'm just slightly confused.
It'd be more helpful for me to send a note around after the meeting.
I think it
It's
might
going to be
be
properly
yes.
informed.
Right, I thought we were talking about different bridges.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just on bridges, Chairman. The 2 bridges you're talking about came to an earlier meeting in the year, and we hadn't made a decision on those bridges, not in committee anyway, not to the best of my knowledge. We were going to have a future report come on those bridges, which are the bridges adjacent to the car park.
But afterwards is why I thought this was a verbal
then,
report on
which
this.
is supporting what you said, but the other bridge, which is the one by the Otters, which is underway, which is something I didn't know about either. So, though if it's not a contradiction, it's just that I think it would have been useful to move to the next business. It's a sensible thing, but to actually make sure that we were recording the minutes which bridges we were talking about, because we've said in here that we're going to do away with a bridge. I've seen no minute of any meeting that said we're going to do
I
away
didn't
with
say
it.
we were doing away with the bridge.
No.
We have agreed to repair 4 bridges, so currently there's works ongoing for 4 bridges that the committee's agreed to work on.
Okay, well, let's bring it to next meeting then. The Chairman's agreeable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as John says, we'll move to the next slide.
Yeah.
And we'll have an update on the bridges, a bit more specific, perhaps.
I can change it. No, that's not.
No, we will, the committee can discuss that at the next meeting. Right. Okay, so item 8. You'll have to help me with this one. I wasn't too sure what we are discussing on access awareness.
So this is just a standing item on the agenda to discuss any issues relating to access. I don't have anything to raise under that item.
Okay.
I have 2 items.
Yes.
Following, I watched the social media posts quite closely, as you would expect. There have been a lot of falls on the pavement around the King's Head.
Yes.
And I had a look at it myself the other day, and the gaps are not big. I mean, they're sort of like about maybe a centimetre or a bit over a centimetre, which may not come into what is officially, hazardous pavement. I don't know what the definitions are, but I do know that a lot of older people who maybe don't pick up their feet very high, I'm a bit like that myself, do seem to come across around there, and I wonder whether there needs to be a rather strategic look at that particular part of town, because it is a bit of a bad spot for falls. And in terms of access, it may not be people who are on wheels, but they could end up on wheels because they keep falling over in that area and breaking parts of their body potentially. That's the one item I'd like to raise.
I'm just conscious that transport is in the planning committee's remit.
Okay, so that for me it was an access issue.
Yeah,
I'll raise
but
it as well.
just to let you know that I'm quite frustrated that a lot of information shared on Facebook, but no one is contacting local councillors with this information. I've only had one detailed explanation of any issue on that corner.
I think people are reporting it on
But they're not-
Fix My Street.
And when I've asked specifically for information so I can chase it up and do something about it, no one contacts me. So I'm just wondering what type of faults are these, because I'm not, the details just aren't coming through to me.
A lot of the information is contained in.
Yeah, but it's all this hearsay. I need the person who's had the incident to contact me. And they're just not.
Well, the last one was the daughter of a woman who fell over.
And I put my email address out there, please give me the details, and no one ever follows up.
Yeah, they might think they've already raised it by putting it on there for it. I mean, let's talk about this offline.
But it is a transportation issue, but I mean, I'm pretty out there because we're in public. please contact the local councillors relevant to the area of the incident, because they can help escalate these issues.
I do tell people to do that as well, and there is a post which has your addresses and contact details at the top as well for that purpose. All right, I'll shut up the other one because that's a transport thing as well.
Same for planning.
I'll save it for that.
Okay. Yes, councillor.
I'd just like to repeat that I don't use social media at all, and I'm afraid that I'm not able to contribute to any debate at council that hasn't come through to council first or at all.
I mean, it's an interesting point because people will say something different on social media, but they will say to someone formally in a letter or an email. And that's one of the issues I do find sometimes. Not saying that anything is untrue on social media, because I'm sure the incidents have happened, but the details surrounding the incident, we just need to know what they are to understand it. Because I've had people saying one thing on social media when I drove down, not related to that corner, but somewhere else in town. It actually turns out it was not even on public ground, it was something completely different. But you know, they can jump to conclusions. So just really, really important that people contact the local council with the details if there is an issue that the council is not dealing with, be that town council or Buckingham council. Councillor Secretary.
Just to say, everybody does access, and town centre events did access in the town centre the other day and discussed it on the disability and access to events and whatever, and areas that it was raised up. And just to say that was one area which was discussed within that committee, which the minutes aren't out yet. And but I do think that what we haven't had, and which perhaps would be something good in one of the committees, is we're discussing access issues and we're not access for all. I think that we need to have an input from access for all and try and re-engage that conversation so that we get, we were always fortunate because Councillor Christine Strain-Clark was a member of Access for All. So at meetings she used to give us updates, very much like other members of help committees. So I would ask that we reinvigorate that conversation, because at the moment we are fortunately able-bodied people talking about disability issues, which we really need a person who's a specialist to come in and explain to us whether we're actually doing the right issues and whether those problems that we see are real issues and we're not foreseeing them as issues. Because I've pushed a wheelchair around and I know how difficult it is to get wheelchairs over. I haven't pushed a wheelchair for 4 years, but I know when I used to push a wheelchair, you soon find out when you're pushing a wheelchair around Buckingham how bad town centre is. And sadly, I'm not able to do that anymore, but other people are in that position. So I would ask that we just, for a future meeting, which one it goes to, it could either go to here or it could go, depending what it is, but would be nice to have an update from Access for All on what they feel needs addressing in the town centre, because then we can actually cite that. I do share the concerns about Facebook tends to be a very long linear conversation. Sometimes if you enter it, you can then take the correspondence away. So if you don't actually see it, then as a local councillor, you don't actually pick on it. Sometimes people message you directly and then you get their issues and you can follow it up. So I think that we do need to take into account the evidence thing is make sure that what we discuss is what's on this agenda. And with that, I think, going back to what I said earlier, I'd just like an update from Access for All so that any issues they're concerned about, then we can go and do their work for them like we always used to.
I'm not sure how active Access for All is at the moment, but I mean, there's nothing stopping anyone from Access for All or our community contacting the town council or councillors for us to bring it to this. So we don't have to personally experience the issue that's being discussed. We can represent our residents via any of our councillors or through a special interest group. Have we had any updates from Access for All recently? Because I'm not sure.
No, I did have an email exchange with John Russell quite recently on the subject, who basically said we're not currently active, but do make sure our funding remains in the bank until we're in a position to
Well, that explains it all then. I apologise for suggesting that, you know, they're not active. But I mean, I do as an individual member in another authority, I follow things up all the while, like Councillor Whitewood. But we wouldn't necessarily bring them to this committee because they're outside in another portal. But maybe we can filter some of those communications.
And of course, some of those issues may not be our assets, so we also need to make sure we're not duplicating work. If there are issues on the highway, they can go straight to Transport for Bucks and Buckinghamshire councillors. If it's to do with, I don't know, one of our buildings or Lace Hill or whatever, then we need to know as an environment committee so we can think about what adjustments or other things we might need to consider. So we need to make sure we're not trying to do everyone's work, we're actually fixing what is in our control that we need to sort out. So that's something to bear in mind once they're up and running again. Okay. So it's also the planning commission, we'll have a few topics being raised, John, yes.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
I've just sent you my report, it's my straightforward.
Excellent, thank you very much. Right, item 9, climate action plan update. We be able to do
Yes, depending on the questions members may raise. So there's not much updated since we last looked at the plan on this committee. There's no items in red, which is what Nina usually does for recent changes. So we did have the event yesterday, which is kind of TC but relevant, especially to the wildlife conference we already had. Recycling is now finally in place everywhere. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions for the town clerk on the action plan? Councillor Sutchbury?
Personally, a question that can, when Nina's back, she'll update us on the progress if she's off at the moment, sadly, and to thank her for the work she's done on this, and just to make a comment that there is no things in the red on here, which is actually a positive position to be in, and just because the town clerk mentioned it, and then because the town clerk mentioned it, the event yesterday I think went very, very successful, and our staff were brilliant, and I think we touched many of the nerves which came out of the annual town meeting in that event. So I think it was good from that perspective as a brief note, but we'll do a brief on that in a future events meeting, but that's just because the town clerk mentioned it. Thank you.
Okay. John?
Just to say that I think we're still waiting on the report of the annual town meeting, and there may well be things coming out from there that will feed back into this action plan. So I think we're waiting on that for the time being.
Okay, any other questions?
No.
Thank you. Just one thought, we're getting close to the end of the month, and there was something that is related to fireworks and the carbon issue. There will be an update on that next month.
Not sure doing anything currently.
So deadline of May 22 on that one.
Well, that'll go to the next event.
Because I just jumped up to the agenda. It was item 10.
To get options for carbon offsetting town council events, generally TCE. So that's the TCE action anyway. So that would be the discussion next TCE meeting.
It'd just be useful, I think, for the Environment Committee to be involved in that, because there's a lot of debate about the pros and cons and of offsetting versus other, what type of offsetting could be discussed. I was very conscious yesterday that we had our Green Spring Fair, but yet we had a number of plastic stands full of plastic items and a diesel engine running all day for the ice cream. So we're doing one thing on one hand, but actually the other. So it'd be useful that if this is supposed to be an emergency action plan, but as of yesterday we were still doing stuff as if it was normal.
As chair of committee events, I'm quite happy to write in with all the concerns about that, and the committee will.
We're not discussing necessarily the climate action plan, which is committee owns. So it's just how do we deal with that?
So what A is on the agenda for next TCE, so that discussion to come. the only two comments I'd make are probably the whole thing's a work in progress. The fireworks company we use do offset.
Yes.
So to some extent, they're offsetting.
You know,
But
is it
how
offset somewhere we don't know anything about, or could be offset locally?
But we can ask that question about what does that actually mean, because that is an interesting question. And fundamentally, I mean, interestingly, the issue is the fireworks, not the bonfire. So having talked to Anya actually on bonfire, the fundamental issue of bonfire is carbon's coming out of the wood, which it would if you put it in the ground anyway. So it just does it all at once. There may be other reasons to be nervous about a bonfire, but that's not one of them. In terms of plastic, we've got a very strong council policy about never using single-use plastics. And if you turn up with a single-use plastic bottle in the office, you will have a clear response. So we have been really serious about what we spend our money on, how we operate. Obviously, it's harder when you're working with partners on stuff to say, please come to our event, but by the way, you must do you've got to be a bit flexible and sensitive in that. But we do need to have that discussion as we do all around the council and keep coming back around the loop again and see where we go next week.
You want to come back?
Yeah, just to say that we discussed the carbon offset in events. We discussed it. It's minuted. The discussion is discussed, and the actual organisation, the company we use, were actually employed by the office of the Prime Minister and was employed by him when he was Mayor of London to actually put the first lot of fireworks off Westminster. So I'm presuming that they also said in their brief to us that they offset carbon. What we can't do is rewrite the rules on carbon offset, but what we do need to do is, in that committee, is if there's further questions, go and ask what they mean by that. That's something we would discuss. But it was all answered to the committee. There was minutes and discussions of members and even a film of it now, us discussing it. So it was all done to the quite thoroughly. So I do think it's. I think it do. Is
the action plan actually not up to date then? Because it says it's to be in place by May. So is it now in place?
Well, I think that's probably just assessing the. I didn't write the action plan, so I'm just.
Well, that's what I was asking as well.
Yeah.
So just get clarity on the I do have to remind you that this committee owns the action plan, so we need to make sure, is the action plan correct at the end of this agenda item, or is it not correct? Just trying to ascertain.
I think there's still scope for the committee to look at all the events. So the problem with the way the action is written is it highlights fireworks, which is probably the one we've looked at the most, actually. So I think when the committee next meets and looks at the action plan, it'd be helpful just to go down events and reflect on where they are against. That's all committed on.
But the last meeting we had it straight after a very long meeting discussing another matter. So members were very conscious of the fact that we only had an hour to actually go through the meeting, to actually, before the staff couldn't actually complete the meeting by 10 o'clock. So they were all very cooperative. And we'd had a very long meeting beforehand discussing an individual item. So I think members were really cooperative and helped us get through that meeting in time.
I think you might be taking this a bit too personal.
No, I'm not worried about it, Warren, really.
We're chastising and challenging a lot of residents and organisations to be as green as possible, but I think we need to have those same standards for ourselves.
Oh, quite.
So we need to be very, very careful that we don't whiz through the action plan if there are questions to be had. But it sounds like it's still a work in progress. But just to set your mind at rest, Councillor Sedgley, there are no rules for offsetting. That's one of the issues. The offsetting can mean a whole raft of things. And this is the big issue. Some people will just pay a cash sum and some American company will plant trees in wherever they fancy, or you can offset locally with a local project, and there's everything in between.
Well, I don't know the answer, but I think we do need the answer. I think we agreed on that.
Or even conceptually, people think offsetting is just a fudge, but anyway. Right, so probably useful if some of those dates are creeping up on us. They'll update at the next meeting. Okay, thank you for those clarifications. That brings us to item 10, the Buckingham Community Wildlife Project. I'm not sure what we're discussing. There's no subtext to this.
So again, this is a standing item. We need to have feedback from historically, the meeting used to be just before this meeting, so we'd have a verbal update from that meeting. The meeting dates have slightly changed. I think Lee's not here to give an update unless somebody else is present.
Defer that to when there's a report as well. Could you defer that to when there's a report? Yeah. Okay, thank you. News releases. I'm conscious that I might bring up the issue of the trees that were damaged or vandalised recently, which was most depressing to see. It isn't specifically on the agenda, but I don't know if I'm able to bring that up as a news release item.
Yeah, I mean, and for information, I think you'll have an email waiting for you from Louise asking for a statement on that.
Right.
You can ask for a statement on it anyway, so
Okay.
I'll already send it something out.
Because it's quite depressing that we've got a second spate of vandalism on that planting project. And Sue, thank you for bringing that to our attention.
I can give a small update on this.
Are we happy to take a small update, slightly off topic, but it's
Agreed.
I've got experience of taking cuttings from black poplar, and I suddenly thought, oh, how on earth didn't I go and pick up the broken tops? So I went looking for five were broken. I found two, three have completely disappeared. I took the two home and I've spoken to Michael Hunt, and he said they'll be all right for quite a long time, just in water. I put them in water and they're bursting forth into leaf. They hardly noticed they were being attacked. I think they will root really readily.
That's good.
okay, thank you for that. John, I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I obviously support the press release. I just, well, people had those questions about it. No, I was going to say, I'm going to put a press release out about the motion on the particulates in the air pollution.
Yeah.
Because I think we should say we had a useful debate prompted by members of the public. Because I think that's good in itself, but it also reinforces the point we do listen. We really want to listen and respond.
So perhaps over that, something that's following the annual town meeting and also at the environment committee, the council is asking such and such.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That sounds good. Councillor Sutchbury.
Just on the black poplars tree, looked at them on my way to the edible woodland at the weekend after finishing the event, and well, I'd have a wander down that way. And if we would take down there a set of cicateas and cut the actual a slope like that, if the tree is alive in the ground, it will throw up 4 pieces of every stump. And those trees, when the south will go like that, which will still be a poplar tree because you coppice poplars. So though they broke the top off the tree, we can save those trees if they're alive in the ground, which they presumably are, and the tree will, which is called coppicing, and we don't do it too high, and it will throw 4 branches off each one, and it will be small branches, and it will come back with some vigour. In my historical profession, I used to cut and lay hedges and do all sorts of things with trees, so I can assure you that it will work. And I've never killed a hedge in my life, so cutting and laying it. So
would that have an impact on the long-term avenue that was used?
It will have an impact on the long-term avenue, but it will save the tree. But the tree will be behind all the others. But in 20 years' time, you won't notice the difference, because they'll catch up. It just be that those trees are configured, rather than being a single trunk, they'll probably be 2 trunks or 3 trunks. But if they've got a decent root ball, they will go. I coppice trees. Sometimes you coppice trees to produce timber and produce it, and it's quite a known thing. So a good set of secateurs down there, and make sure you cut it at a slope so it doesn't rot. If you cut it flat, it will rot. That will give it chance, because we will be discussing whether we replant. We'll know by the time we get to the autumn if we need to replant. But we'll have the answer by the autumn. If it's shot that it's still alive, we can take a very discussion based upon the evidence on the ground. But at the moment, it's got a broken area which is damaged, which will basically get diseased. So if you cut it off at a slope, the water will run off it, it will shoot. If it doesn't shoot, I'll be very surprised. It means the trees were dead anyway.
Okay, one last thing before we move on this.
I think Neil Passmore will be on the case as well. I think he's been away, but he is the Bucks Council tree officer.
And of course, it's on their land, you know. And I know there have been some issues elsewhere in the parks in Buckingham where the police have been involved as well. So the parks, you know, have been involved. So there have been some other incidents. So hopefully the schools that did this will end up doing something in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Well, we don't know who they were.
Well, exactly. They need to be caught and be sure the error of their ways with our environment. Okay, so you've got the note on the motion. Excellent. Okay, chair's announcements. I've got nothing else to add apart from the trees I just mentioned in the news release. So the date of the next meeting is Monday, the 20th of June.